Come on, Savannah.
3, 2, 1, face off. Face forward, please, guys. Perfect.
Thanks, boys. Thank you, guys. All right, good. We're moving. Let's go.
If Ian knocks him out, I wouldn't be that surprised. These are the two best guys in welterweight division, and I think it's a tough fight. But again, we're talking about Islam Makhachev. He's getting a little bit older now, but he's still in his prime. Seen multiple guys say how strong he is. Once he gets older, guys, they don't seem to be able to escape. I can't think at any point that Islam is going to lose. Islam Makhachev, decision.
I feel like there's a lot to talk about for every aspect of this fight. Now, the striking, Ian Garry, what are the obvious things? Very tall, the tallest opponent that Islam has ever faced to date.
Yeah.
Habib and Islam also said that he's very hard to hit because he moves a lot. You know, he tends to run, and Islam said the only thing in camp that I really haven't enjoyed is having to chase fighters down because we're preparing specifically for Ian and how much he uses the cage and kind of disengages and only really re-engages on his own terms.
Right.
But Islam's also a great striker in his own right. I think because his grappling's so good, he doesn't get a lot of credit for being a really good striker, and he actually is a very good striker. So let's start there. You know, it's going to be open stance mostly, left-handed for Islam, going to be fighting out of southpaw. Ian fights orthodox, so we're going to have an open stance likely for the majority of the fight, which I know you love to break those down.
Yes.
So what are you seeing on the striking in this one?
Yeah, this is really interesting. Ian Garry is obviously a great striker, and that's how he's been able to win most of his fights and get to a title shot. But Islam Makhachev's striking is actually slept on, and it's largely because he comes from Dagestan, and everybody knows Khabib was the guy who set the precedents, and they have great grappling from there. But the Dagestani strikers or fighters are becoming really high-level strikers. Just look at Usman or Magomedov.
More knockouts than any other method of victory.
Exactly. So I am actually loving how Islam's striking is coming along. His kicks are great. He's got really good discipline with his jab hand. So whenever he does throw a combo or closes distance to try to land some strikes, when he exits, he's really good about putting a jab in your face just to sort of keep you at bay. It usually doesn't land, but it's really good to get something out there and in the line of fire from what Ian Garry or anybody else in the past could have been able to throw.
When you look at JDM, Renato Moicano, Dustin Poirier, as much as Dustin Poirier is a legend of the sport, they're not as dangerous as the guys I've just mentioned. Not only that, every single one of them is bigger, longer. Javkat was 18-0 and 18 finishes when I fought. Carlos Praches had an 11-fight win streak by knockout when I fought him. When I step into this octagon against Islam Makhachev, I'm going to prove to the world why Ian Machado is truly great.
You're going to go into this fight believing Ian Garry is going to beat Islam? Because it's starting to feel that way. Just a little more and a little more. Charles Oliveira, just to throw a name at you, a guy that knows everybody, has the right to an opinion. He said Ian Garry is going to win. That's interesting. Ian Garry is a stand-up fighter from Ireland who idolizes Conor McGregor. So now we know everything we need to know about Ian Garry. He's a sharpshooter. He's going to use his hands. He's going to use his kicks. He can't do any jiu-jitsu. But then somewhere along the way, he started training with Damian Maia. And it was an interesting coincidence because he ended up on bottom against MVP with his back taken, but was never in trouble. So then we're going to go, okay, great. You had problems grappling with this guy, MVP, who's not a grappler. You got real big problems now because you're going to fight Rakhmonov, who's going to expose everything that you don't know. And it turned out that punching and kicking Irish kid had spent some time in the wrestling room, right? I mean, he just looked better than we knew that he was. Enters the 5-round club, deals with it. And one thing that he had to deal with that night, Ian Garry has never fought where he was not bolstered up and he was the guy. Ian Garry's never done a ring walk where the audience knew this guy's overwhelmed. He's done that to other guys, but he's not been in that position. How does the guy do? Guys act one way when they're the favorite, but they seldomly act the same way as an underdog, and vice versa. Some guys will do their best work as underdog. Some guys actually get drawn down when you got an audience saying, I don't know, this could be a hard one. That seeps into them. But it didn't seep into Garry. So how are you going to beat him?
Oh man, that fight, when is gonna be that fight? October, I think? October, August? So, man, it's hard to be against Islam Makhachev, you know? I think he's super good. Looks like the division fits perfect to him. Ian Garry has an amazing footwork, amazing head movement, a really good distance. But I don't know, man. I think I'm going with Islam Makhachev for sure.
If someone gave you $10,000 right now to bet on that fight, where are you putting it?
I think the odds, because of the style, favors Makhachev probably. You know, stylistically, he's a freaking nightmare to fight for anyone. He's, I think, right now the best pound for pound on the planet. But Ian Garry definitely has all the chance also on his side to do it. He's a very good striker. He's very long. He's great grappling, a great grappler as well. But he need, I think, to find a way to keep the fight standing, you know, like, and to use his style to his own advantage.
3 days. That is all that remains before Islam Makhachev and Ian Machado Garry finally settle one of the most closely watched matchups surrounding UFC 330. And with the fight getting this close, the conversation has changed. This is no longer about what might happen months from now. Every training session is finished, every prediction is being scrutinized, and every reaction from the fighters carries more weight. The biggest question is simple, but the answer is anything but simple. Can Ian Garry create the kind of fight that forces Islam Makhachev away from his preferred rhythm, or will Islam impose his style before Garry has the chance to establish his own? That is exactly why the final days before this matchup have generated so much discussion. Analysts within the combat sports community have pointed out that this is a difficult fight to evaluate using a single strength or weakness. There are layers to it: distance, timing, wrestling, clinch exchanges, defensive reactions, cardio, composure, and the ability to make adjustments could all become decisive. And that is where the face-off reactions become interesting. When two fighters are only days away from competing, people naturally start looking for clues. Body language gets analyzed. Eye contact gets analyzed. Confidence gets analyzed. Even the smallest exchange can become part of the story. But experienced observers know that a face-off does not determine a fight. What it can reveal, however, is how each man is carrying the pressure of the moment. Islam Makhachev enters this matchup with the reputation of a fighter who wants to make the fight happen on his terms. His greatest advantage is not simply one individual technique. It is the way he can connect different phases of MMA together. He can threaten with his striking, force reactions, close distance, enter the clinch, attack takedowns, and then make an opponent work continuously once the fight reaches the ground. That creates a difficult problem because defending one phase can open the door to another. But Ian Garry presents a very different challenge. Garry's biggest opportunity is his ability to make the fight uncomfortable from range. He is naturally interested in controlling distance, creating reactions, and making opponents reach for him rather than allowing them to establish their preferred position. Against a fighter whose game becomes increasingly dangerous when he can close distance, that becomes extremely important. Garry cannot afford to simply stand in front of Islam and wait to react. If Islam gets comfortable reading his movement, the fight could begin changing rapidly. A small mistake in positioning could allow Islam to close the gap. Once the distance disappears, the Irish fighter could find himself defending a completely different fight than the one he prepared for. And that is one of the biggest tactical questions heading into UFC 330. Who controls the geography of the fight? If Garry controls the outside, keeps his feet underneath him, and forces Islam to repeatedly reset, he can potentially make the champion spend valuable energy just trying to get into position. But if Islam consistently cuts off exits instead of chasing, that equation changes. Several respected voices have noted that this matchup could come down to patience. That might sound strange considering all the chaos surrounding the fight, but patience could actually be one of the most important weapons on either side. Islam does not necessarily need to rush for a takedown. Garry does not necessarily need to chase a knockout. Both fighters have reasons to make the other man uncomfortable first. For Islam, the objective would be to create moments where Garry's movement becomes predictable. For Garry, the objective would be to make sure those moments never arrive. That battle could begin immediately. The opening minutes may tell us a great deal about how both camps approach this matchup. Does Garry immediately establish his range? Does Islam patiently test the reactions before committing? Does Garry attempt to keep the fight in open space? Does Islam begin working toward the fence? These are not minor details. They could determine the entire structure of the contest. And then there is the wrestling question. Islam's grappling threat changes how an opponent can strike. Even when a takedown is not attempted, the possibility of one can influence stance, movement, and defensive reactions. A fighter who is worried about being taken down cannot always move exactly the way he wants to move as a striker. That creates opportunities, but Garry's path is not simply about avoiding takedowns. He needs to make Islam pay for the attempts. Every failed failed entry should potentially cost the champion something: position, energy, confidence, or momentum. If Garry can force Islam to repeatedly work without getting clean control, the fight could become much more complicated as the rounds progress. On the other hand, if Islam establishes control early, Garry could be forced to fight from positions he does not want, and this is where cardio becomes fascinating. People often discuss cardio as though it is simply about who can breathe better in the later rounds. In a fight like this, it is much more complicated. Wrestling exchanges can drain energy differently from striking exchanges. Defending takedowns can be exhausting. Getting back to your feet can require enormous effort. Even maintaining defensive discipline while tired can become a problem. That means the fighter who looks physically fresher later may not necessarily have started with better cardio. He may simply have spent less energy fighting the battle he did not want. This is why the first few rounds matter so much. If Islam spends the early stages forcing Garry to defend grappling exchanges, the later rounds could look very different. But if Garry makes Islam repeatedly miss, reset, and chase without securing meaningful control, the pressure could eventually shift in the opposite direction. There is another factor that cannot be ignored: composure. A fight at this level can change after one mistake. A fighter can have the perfect game plan and then abandon it after getting hurt. Another can lose an early exchange and remain completely disciplined. The ability to stay emotionally controlled could be just as important as physical ability. That makes the face-off reactions relevant, but not because a stare tells us who will win. The real question is whether the confidence displayed before the fight matches the discipline required once the cage door closes. Because confidence is useful, overconfidence can be expensive. For Garry, the pressure is enormous because he has an opportunity to change the way people view his career. Defeating Islam would not simply be another win added to his record. It would fundamentally reshape the conversation around him and establish him as a fighter capable of solving one of the most difficult stylistic problems in the sport. For Islam, the stakes are equally significant. Every champion eventually reaches the point where the question changes from "can he win?" to "how long can he continue doing this?" Another successful defense strengthens the argument that his style remains extremely difficult to solve, even when opponents know exactly what is coming. That is why there is so much uncertainty around this matchup. The general sentiment among professionals who have studied this closely is not that one fighter has no chance. It is that both men have a realistic path, but those paths look completely different. Garry's ideal fight is one where distance remains his friend. He wants space, timing, and the ability to dictate when exchanges happen. He wants Islam reacting rather than establishing control. Islam's ideal fight is almost the opposite. He wants Garry thinking about the takedown, defending the clinch, fighting for position, and eventually making the kind of mistake that allows Islam to turn one exchange into sustained control. So which version of the fight are we actually going to see? That is the million-dollar question, and the closer we get to UFC 330, the harder it becomes to ignore the possibility that the opening minutes could be explosive. If Garry comes out aggressively and refuses to give Islam the respect that many opponents have shown him, the champion may immediately face a completely different type of challenge. But if Islam manages to get his hands on Garry early, the entire atmosphere could change in seconds. One successful takedown could force Garry to reveal how well he handles prolonged grappling pressure. One clean sequence from Garry could force Islam to reconsider how aggressively he enters, and one mistake from either man could completely flip the fight. That is why the predictions coming out now should be treated carefully. There is a temptation to choose a winner based on reputation. Another temptation is to assume that the more complicated fighter automatically has the advantage, but MMA does not work that way. Styles matter, timing matters, preparation matters, and perhaps most importantly, adaptation matters. The fighter who recognizes the opponent's adjustments first could ultimately take control. My prediction is therefore not based on expecting one man to simply dominate the other. Islam has a very clear route to victory through pressure, positional control, and grappling. Garry has a very real opportunity if he can maintain distance, force Islam to reset, and punish predictable entries. If Islam gets consistent control, I favor the champion's ability to turn those moments into longer sequences. But if Garry can keep the fight standing and make Islam repeatedly work just to enter range, this could become far more competitive than some predictions suggest. That uncertainty is exactly what makes the final 3 days so compelling. The face-offs are done, the predictions are coming in, the camps have made their final preparations. Now there is almost nothing left to hide behind. Soon, the theories disappear, the game plans collide, and when the cage door closes at UFC 330, we will finally find out whether Islam Makhachev can force Ian Machado Garry into the kind of fight he wants, or whether Garry can keep the champion at the end of his weapons and create one of the biggest surprises of the event. So now I want to hear your prediction. 3 days before UFC UFC 330, who has the better path to victory? Does Islam Makhachev impose his grappling and pressure, or does Ian Garry keep the fight at range and shock everyone with a performance that changes the entire conversation around him? Let me know your prediction in the comments, and subscribe for more UFC news, fight reactions, expert analysis, and predictions as we count down to the biggest moments in combat sports.